Hello students, welcome to another lesson on the King's Indian defense, and this time we're going to be focusing on the following two systems that the white pieces could use. The first one, notice how they did something like H3 followed by G4, and on the other one they did knight G2 E2 trying to get the knight to G3 and then H4 and H5. Now guys, none of these systems are that popular or considered to be a big deal, but I understand that they could be tricky to some of you. So we're gonna go over them. I don't want you to continue to play the King's Indian defense, knowing that there are some lines that could give you a hard time. And there's another move that some of you have mentioned, which is an early H4 in the King's Indian defense. But just like these other two, that premature H4 is not a big deal for the black pieces. So I'm not going to go too deep into that H4 idea, but hopefully going over these other two plans are going to help me explain how to deal with the H4 as well. So stay tuned and let's get to it. Alright guys, so the first system that we're going to talk about is going to be this one, where they do H3 followed by G4. Again, it's not a big deal if you are prepared. If you've never seen this before, you might try to go with the same plans that we've talked about for the classical, for other systems, and you might get in trouble. And this is part of the reason why I continue to talk about the King's Indian defense. And the reason is, guys, that I don't want you to just use the same plan, only one plan against everything, because then you're going to get in trouble. And you're going to see what I mean in a moment. So anyways, the opening is going to start D4. I'm going to keep telling you the same thing. I don't like to do knight F6 first. And that's because I don't like that bishop G5, right? If you're prepared, if you don't mind it, then feel free to do knight F6 first. I'm just going to do G6, C4. Now I do knight F6, knight C3, bishop G7, E4, D6, and then this variation with H3 and G4, guys, comes after knight F3, we castle, and instead of doing bishop E2, like we learned in lesson number 85, they're going to do H3. Now, this H3 seems very quiet at first, and it looks like it's just preventing us from doing bishop G4, even knight G4, but many times they just end up doing this G4, which again, is not a big deal if you know what you're doing. And there are two main rules that I follow whenever I'm facing this that I want you guys to be familiar with it, because it could help you with other variations. So anyways, after pawn to H3, I told you against the classical that we would do knight A6 followed by E5, right? Well, whenever I see this H3, they're not going to castle here as quickly. So I just like to do E5 right away. Feel free to do knight A6. Many times it sort of transposes, but I like to do E5 right away. So I meet H3 with E5. Now, after this move, guys, in this game that I'm going to show you, the white pieces actually went pawn to D5, and then after knight A6, you see it's the same thing. You're going to bring the knight to C5, do A5 so that they can never kick us out. And as a matter of fact, some people like to do A5 followed by knight A6 and knight C5. Now, I myself like to do knight A6 first, just in case, because I know this is an option. So in this game, after D5, knight A6, and then the white pieces did bishop G5. Guys, here they could do bishop E3 as well. They could do so many things. But I picked this game where they did bishop G5 because I know this bishop G5 move could be a little bit psychologically, it could affect many King's Indian defense players. So I wanted you to see all of these little ghosts in action for you to see that they're not a big deal. And at the end of the day, that's what they are, ghosts. If you understand the plans, the main rules, you should be fine. So anyways, after bishop G5, we have H6. The bishop went back. They're not going to give you the dark square bishop, guys. Look at these pawns in the center. Especially the most forward pawn is the same color as this bishop. So this is the bad bishop. They want to keep their light bishop on the board. So bishop E3. And you might be asking, okay, why do they want to go to G5 and then go back? Well, for whites, the idea is that now they're creating sort of a weakness on H6. So by the time they do Queen D2, they're going to be hitting H6. So they're just provoking you to push that pawn to H6. So anyways, after bishop E3, then knight to C5. Again, guys, we know the plan. We're hitting on E4. We should know this from lesson number 85. And we're not concerned about them taking because they'll be giving us their good bishop. So after knight C5, knight d2 protecting e4. And now guys, we have pawn to a5. All of these, you should have, even if I hadn't told you any of this, I'm pretty sure you could have come to it by using what we learned in lesson 85. This is pretty much what we do against the classical, but now you're going to see how after a5, the white pieces do pawn to g4. And guys, this is the moment when a lot of people start freaking out. And it's understandable. I've been there myself. I remember having a hard time against this variation because what did I do? I used to do the same plan that I had learned against the classical. And I'm sure that you, just like me, you're going to appreciate this lesson, guys, because you're going to be, it's like hitting yourself against the same wall over and over and over. If you just go with the plan that we learned, f5, because look, the center is locked, and we learned as King's Indian defense players to do this f5 plan. We move the knight, followed by f5. And as a matter of fact, people like myself, we get hooked by the King's Indian defense because of plans like f5, right? Well, if you do that right now prematurely, you're going to get in trouble. So we have to learn to adapt and use different systems depending on what the white pieces do. So now that we get here, let's talk about this. Guys, basically what the white pieces are doing is what we learned in lesson number 82. They're being prophylactic. They understand this is a person, the person who plays this plan is a person that understands what the King's Indian defense players want to do. We want to do that plan to break on f5. Well, they're saying, you know what? Forget about it because I'm controlling f5. And if you go for it, I'm going to be opening up your king side and I'm going to be getting you in trouble. So we as the black pieces, we need to understand this. Maybe the first time you play this after this lesson, you forget it, but then you do it again. And the third time, you're going to understand what to do. So with that said, let's learn the two main rules that I follow when I play against this system. Like we've been doing so far with our openings, I don't want you to memorize move by move. I want you to understand the main ideas, the main rules that we follow. That way you can play it anytime just by remembering these main ideas. So rule number one is the following. I'm going to meet this plan, guys, with c6. And this is very important. We only do c6 when the white pieces already did g4. Why? Well, the rule number one is the following. It is a general chess principle. If you're being attacked on the flanks, you need to strike the center. So I'm being attacked on the king side, I need to strike the center. But then if I just tell you that, guys, you're going to be like, okay, that's the principle, I have to do it. You probably follow it every time you get attacked on one of the flanks, but you need to understand the reason behind it. It's easier for you to remember if you understand it. So why do we want to strike the center in this position? Well, now I know that this king is not going to be safe if it castles to the king side. Look at these pawns. So I want to, first of all, open up lines towards the king in the center. So by striking the center, I'm opening up lines to get to the king. And at the same time, I'm making the queen side unstable so that they cannot castle that either. So even if they get a powerful attack on the king side, this king is not going to feel safe on any part of the board. If they stay in the center, well, I'm striking the center, opening up lines to get to you. If you go to the queen side at some point, I'm already opening up lines as well to get to the king. And of course, if they go to the king side, then these pawns are already pushed. It is going to be easier for me to get to that king. So as simple as that. Rule number one, we're going to do c6 once they compromised, once they did pawn to g4. So in this move, guys, in this position, after they did pawn to g4, I'm going to do c6, as simple as that. So after pawn to c6, the white pieces in this game went bishop e2. They have to continue with development, and we're going to do the same thing. There's no rush. We want to do something like a4, queen a5, continue to expand on the queen side. And this is sort of what I was mentioning before. I really want you to be flexible. I want you to not fall in love with one plan of doing e5 and then expanding on the king side. Just know that sometimes it makes sense for us to attack on the other side. We have to admit it. They gain control on the king side. We need to look for counterplay somewhere else. And that somewhere else is going to be the queen side. So you have to be open to it. And that's what's going to make you a more complete player. So these ideas, we're learning them in the King's Indian defense, but you could use them on any other opening where you're being attacked on one of the side of the boards. Okay, so we strike the center, and now we're going to try to create some counterplay on the queen side. So anyways, after pawn to c6, bishop e2, developing their last minor piece, we're going to do the same thing. Bishop d7, there is no rush. So after bishop d7, in this specific game that I want to show you guys, the white pieces went ahead and they castled. So they understand their king is not safe in the center, at least not for that long, and castling to the queen side is not good either. I'm really close, my queen could come over as well, and they're not going to be safe. I could even do some b5 at some point. So they decided to castle and play it safely. At least that's what I think. I think they just gave up on that. And that's, to me, that has been always the intention, guys. When I start with these expansions on the queen side, I start striking the center, I'm hoping for my opponent to give up on this crazy attack over here and just play it quietly. And I know that's going to be the case for you too. If you are looking at this lesson, it means that you're a little bit scared with these attacks. So anytime you see your opponent giving up on it and just castling to the same side, I know you're going to appreciate it until you get the hang of it and you actually welcome this opposite side idea. So anyways, they castled here, but you might be thinking, okay, what if they don't castle? Because many of my opponents are not castling. Well, let me show you what else they could have done in this position. Number one, they could have done h4. And I think this is what many of you guys are concerned with. So after h4, we have to remember, we have talked about this so many times, but we have to remember, if we're being attacked on one of the side of the board, like in this case, we're being attacked on the king side, we do not want to move anything there. If we move any of these pawns, we're creating weaknesses. So we want to keep this quiet, but guys, we don't want to be just waiting there to be attacked. So we have to create something on the queen side, or of course in the center. Now, another question that you might be asking is, okay, I do c6, how do I know if I should take? Is it a good idea? No, well, that's what the second rule has to do with. I told you rule number one is I'm going to do c6 whenever they compromise with g4. So I know the king side is not safe anymore, I do c6. Now, when do I take on d5 and why? Well, this is the rule that I follow. You're going to test it after you play it in your games. You let me know, guys, if it works for you, if it makes sense for you or not. So in my head, I'm going to take on d5 whenever I'm able to follow up with b5. Remember, it's all about opening up lines, creating counterplay on the queen side, right? So this b5 is really important. And I want to take on d5 when I'm ready to do that. So that's rule number two. Don't forget that. For the most part, when people do c takes c5, it is going to follow up with b5. So anyways, in this case, after pawn to h4, then pawn to a4. Remember, the plan is going to be pawn a4 to bring the queen to a5. So from this position, we have to talk about a few variations that the white pieces could do. They could do h5, and I know that you must be concerned about this one. They could do g5. Of course, this is another line that you want to know what to do, guys, if your opponent does it. It could be in this position, it could be any other position. You want to know how to react to it. And then the other variation that is not that popular, but some people might do it, is bishop takes c5. So even though in the game they didn't do any of these, I want you to know what to do in that case. All right, so let me go back here. So a4, and let's start, guys, with the move h5. Now, if they do h5, we're just going to continue with queen a5. Guys, why do we want to do queen a5 so badly? Why do we not care about them taking on g6? Well, the thing is that by doing queen a5, you should know this from our lessons on the picks, the check picks. We're creating a pin on this knight. And now we're trying to take on e4. And guys, by the way, if I just activate the engine, notice how it is negative 0.3. So this is slightly better for black, but more than showing off, oh, this is like we're winning or anything like that, it's just for you to see that even the engine is telling you this position is okay for the black pieces. And if you understand the middle game plans, what we're looking for, you're going to give your opponents a hard time. So anyways, going back, after h5, we're going to do queen a5. We're threatening to do something like knight e4. And another plan here is pawn a3. This queen is also putting pressure, like it's of course pinning it, but it's attacking the knight. And the only defender is the b pawn. So if we do a3, they cannot take because of the knight. And now, guys, they have to decide if they want us to take on e4 or if they want us to do a3. Now, I know that some of you might be thinking, what if they take on g6? Well, you could easily take back, or you could even just let them continue with that. You could do a3, and even if they take on f7, I'm going to take back, and I have so much initiative on the queen side that they're going to get in trouble. We have compensation for that pawn that we gave up. And again, if I activate here, see, negative 0.5. So we have to be better in this position. So they're giving something like b4, trying to give back the pawn, and that's how they sort of stay in the game. You see, b4 is the main move. And now we're going to take with the queen, and you see they gave us the pawn back, and that's the only way for them to stay in the game. So I'm not going to go that deep into that variation, but now you know that it's not a big deal. So again, let me turn this off. And what I see the most, let me actually go queen a5. What I see the most at this point, guys, they want to prevent us from doing this. So f3 is a move that you're going to see a lot. Now, just to give you an idea of how this could continue, you have a3, queen c2, a takes, queen takes on b2, then c takes d5. Now, remember rule number 2. Once we take on d5 is because we're going to follow up with b5. I don't know if immediately, but we're going to do it in the near future. So after c takes d5, c takes d5, and now pawn b5. So we're getting more initiative. We're threatening to do even b4 at some point. And the beauty of this move is that the pawn cannot even be taken. Even though they have 3 attackers on the pawn and we have 2 defenders, if they did a move like knight takes b5, we have rook f to b8, and now the knight is pinned. And now we're the ones who have more attackers on that knight. And if they do something like a4, bishop takes b5, bishop takes b5, and now I want to see if you guys can pause the video and try to come up with the next move for the black pieces. Well, if you thought of the move rook takes b5, you did not find the best move. The best move, that's not bad, guys, because we're putting pressure, we're pinning that pawn, but the best move is knight d3. We're forking the king and the queen, and if the bishop takes it, then we take on b2. So guys, again, this is what would have happened if they had done h5. Again, we're not so concerned about that h5 pawn because we have so much initiative on the queen side. So again, queen a5, putting pressure on that diagonal, trying to take on e4, and putting pressure on c3, and then we have this idea of pawn a3. So that should give you an idea of what to do with h5. Then guys, if they did something like g5, I know this is the other variation that you might be like, okay, do I take, do I not take? Well, we're going to take, and then we're going to do knight h7. In this position, it makes a lot of sense, guys, because they don't have a quick way to bring the queen over to the h file. Like if the queen could come here and here to do checkmate, that's a different story. But we're going to have plenty of time to move the rook, and then the knight could go to f8, and everything is going to be protected. Not to mention that we're not just going to be here quiet waiting for them to get us in trouble. Instead, we're going to be creating things on the center and the queen side. And you're going to see how this king has to make a decision if it's going to stay there, castle to the queen side, or just walk to the king side. So just to give you an idea, after we take, they take, we go knight h7. They could continue with knight f3, trying to bring more pieces to the king side. But then again, we take on d5. And remember, once we take on d5, it's because we are preparing to do pawn to b5. So after c takes back, queen a5 first, we're going to do b5. So now we have 2 defenders. And after queen d2, rook f to c8. Guys, notice how over and over and over, we're just expanding on the queen side. This is where we have more space, the initiative. We're going to focus on it. And if the knight gets attacked too much, we're just going to do knight f8. So king f1, notice how this king is getting away. And now we have pawn to b5. Again, this is already move, guys, number 19. So just play chess, focus on the queen side. You have no business on the king side, at least for now. And now if I activate this, you're going to see how it says positive 0.4, which is slightly better for white, but only if they do rook h4. If they do something else, then slightly better for the black pieces. So this is a pretty even position. So rook h4, then it's giving us what, pawn to b4. So it's just a matter of we attack on the queen side, they attack on the king side, and we just play chess. But again, move number 20 already. After b4, we're threatening e4, so we could continue to put more pressure on it, and we could continue to create more weaknesses on the queen side before they could create anything on the king side. So guys, this is a position. It's very unlikely that you get all the way here, but if you do, you're going to know the main idea. So now we're not concerned about pawn to g5 or pawn to h5, as long as we have pawn a4, queen a5, all of this initiative on the queen side. Then lastly, if they did something like bishop c5, we're just going to take, we're not afraid of that, guys. We're not afraid of this passed pawn or anything like that. As a matter of fact, the main line here is, let me actually go, look, up 0.0, so it's a very even position. But the main line is, or at least what you see the most, is knight takes a4, free knight, or free pawn, I'm sorry. Pawn takes, then knight takes on c5. And then after they take, we're just going to collect on e4. And guys, again, this is a very comfortable position for the black pieces. Nothing to be concerned with. You just get some good counterplay. So again, they take, pawn takes e4, and if I activate this one more time, that's going to be 0.1, negative 0.3. You see, it's just pretty even. It's a very good position to play here. So anyways, I'm going to drop it here, guys. Feel free to go over this video as many times as you want to review these lines. Now, if they did something like what they did in the game, where they did not do h4, they just castled, then you're going to see how the black pieces handle this. Notice that we're both on the same side, we welcome these, but now we're going to try to punish them for having these pawns pushed like that. So you're going to see how the game continues, and hopefully this makes sense to you guys. So the next move here for the black pieces was pawn to h5. So now they came into our game. So we are King's Indian defense players. We know how to attack on the king side. So now that the king is here, we don't have to go after it on the queen side. We don't have to go after it in the center. We have to go after it on the king side. And we know exactly how to do this. So after h5, they went king g2. Now c takes d5, e takes e5. If instead they had done c takes d5, then we're going to do pawn to b5, guys. Remember, that's what we're looking for. They cannot take on b5 because once the bishop leaves, then we're going to be taking on g4. So just for you guys to know that. Now, in this game, they took with the e-pawn, hoping to use the e4 square for the knights. But then after h takes g4, h takes e4, knight h7. And guys, why do you think we put the knight on h7? This time, we're not trying to be defensive. Actually, we're getting the knight out of the way to do f5. We're very familiar with this. It only makes sense now because the king is here. So we're going to attack the king on the king side. So after knight h7, knight d goes to e4, we take, they take, and then pawn to f5. Exactly what we know. We don't really mind it if they take on d6 because again, we're going for that king. So in this game, they actually took. Then pawn to b6, a very powerful move. You really need to understand this position to come up with a move like this. They're not really concerned about losing the pawn. It's just that they did not want the bishop to go to c5. Even the pawn were preventing it from going to c5. So b6 is a very powerful move, guys. Again, this is move number 19. So they're just playing chess here. So after b6, pawn to f3, f4, typical of the King's Indian defense. So bishop f2. And now, guys, there's a very powerful move here for the white pieces. Let's see if we can figure it out. Well, the move is actually a discovered attack on this knight. So bishop takes c4, exposing that king, and we're hitting the pawn, the knight on d6. So f takes c4, which I think was not the most accurate move. Then queen takes d6. And notice how they have this passed pawn, a protected passed pawn. But we have two passed pawn as well, and this king is about to get in trouble. So after queen d6, bishop f3, knight g5, that knight went h7, g5, we keep putting pressure on it, we're threatening to do e4. So after bishop h4, knight takes on f3, queen takes on f3, and now, guys, pawn to e4. You could have done something like rook a to e8, but then they're gonna get the queen in the way, you're gonna get a little bit sort of like a blockade right there. So after e4, queen takes, now rook a to e8. Notice how all of our pieces are either on the king side or close to it, ready to attack to put pressure on that king. So the queen went back to f3, and now rook e3, we keep putting pressure on it. There's no doubt that the black pieces have the initiative here. This this rook is not in the game, and it looks like they're playing with one less rook. So after queen d1, pawn to f3, they cannot even take back. King goes to h3, then rook e2, king on the 7th rank, we're threatening checkmate on h2. And now after bishop g3, we have bishop e5. Guys, all of our pieces are working together, putting pressure on that king. So c5, then queen f6. They have to be even careful with queen h8, followed by rook h2. So bishop takes e5, queen takes e5, rook h1, and now guys, there is checkmate in 2 moves. Can you find it? Well, if you pause the video and you found check followed by rook g2, then congrats, because that's a really nice checkmate in 2 moves. So rook g2, and the game is over. All right, guys, so this was really long. We had a lot to talk about in this variation, but I think many of you are going to appreciate it. So I hope that this gives you an idea of how to play against this variation with h3 followed by g4. I don't know how often you're getting it, but I have to say I get it myself sometimes, and it's really nice to know what you're doing, because if not, it could get you in a lot of trouble. So I'm gonna go back a little bit more. Just remember, after a5, all of this looks very normal from what we learned in the lesson number 85. After g4, we have to remember, once they compromised, we're going to do c6. And then the other rule is, when do we take on d5? Well, whenever we're ready to break or to do the b5 move. So bishop e2, we cannot get ahead of ourselves and try to do our plans without finishing development. And now we're trying to do a4 followed by queen a5. If they end up castling here, well, we're going to try to do h5 and take advantage of that king being exposed. So guys, I hope that this makes sense. Like I said before, feel free to go back as many times as you want. Now, let me go back a little bit here. We don't have much time. I don't want to make this lesson that long, but if I go back here, I wanted to talk to you also about this variation where they could do knight g2 e2, hoping to get to g3, and then just trying to do h4 and h5. Now guys, this idea in some ways is no different to the 150 attack or the Samish variation. We talked about how our opponents, they just know that they're going to attack there, they're going to do knight g3, h4, and h5. And in many cases, this is the only thing our opponents know. So to me, I just treat it just like I treat the 150 attack, just like I treat all of these variations where they want to attack me on the king side immediately. So what do? I delay castling, and I try to do c6, a6, and b5. The same thing. If you understand this, you're not going to be concerned about this plan. You're not going to be concerned about, some people have talked about h4 immediately to do h5. Well, we don't mind it. H4, this is something that I mentioned at the beginning. Some people have asked about this. Well, many times you could just meet that with h5. You continue with your game, that's it. Or you could just ignore it and just do c6, a6, b5, sort of like we're going to see over here. Sorry that I'm not going too deep into this, but to be honest, guys, if you look, if I go here to this option, notice how, let me go back a little bit more. Okay, you're gonna see h4. Well, it's down here. This is like second to last option, and look at the stats. 33% win for white, 67% win for black. So this doesn't represent a big danger to us. But even if they do it, you could just handle it the way you're going to see knight g2 e2. So what do I do when I see knight g2 e2? I know that they want to do knight g3, h4, and h5. Why else would they put the knight in front of the bishop? Well, maybe they want to do the fianchetto variation, but you're going to see how we handle that in the future. But again, it is very rare to see someone do this first and then do the fianchetto. So typically, if they're gonna do the fianchetto, they do the fianchetto right away, because this knight sometimes goes to f3. So anyways, when I see this move, I know they are on crazy attacking mode on the king side, so I just go c6. Many books are going to recommend a6, but it transposes into the same thing. So after pawn to c6, you're going to see knight g3, that's okay. I'm going to do now pawn to a6. If I could do b5 right away, great, but this pawn is not letting me. So I'm going to do a6, sort of like I told you guys, in the same-ish variation. So after bishop e2, see, h4 and h5, and this is a little bit like the, I think it's called Averbach variation, that they do bishop e2, bishop g5 with the idea of attacking there. And to be honest, that one is more sound, and we're going to be talking about it at some point in this course. And that one is one that it's a little bit more powerful than these ideas of knight e2 and knight g3. But still, this deserves some attention. So anyways, bishop e2 at this point, and guys, we just go with b5. That's it. It's the same thing that I told you before. Now this king is not gonna come to the queen side. Look at this. I have so much space there. I'm already putting pressure on it. The king is gonna have to castle here, and then forget about this attack. If they just take on b5, I'm going to take with the a pawn, opening up this file. Forget about castling there. I'm throwing b4. I just get a very nice position as the black pieces. In many games, guys, they're just going to castle, and once the king is castled there, I could do the same thing. I'm not that concerned about the attack on the king side, so it's safe to go there. Now, in many games, they could do, let me actually go back one more move. They could do something like pawn to b4, but then we also castle because there's nothing for them to do here. They're really far from doing anything over here. And even if they did, I'm going to start striking the center. I'm going to start putting pressure, and this king has nowhere safe to be. So they have to end up castling to that side. So I'm not going to go that far into this variation. Just know, treat it like we treat the 150 attack, like one of the plans that we talked in the same-ish variation. Just do c6, a6, and b5. Now, guys, not to leave you hanging, some of you who have talked about h4. Again, you could meet it with h5, you could just ignore it, but just to show you, let's say you go c6. Even if they did something like h5, like you might find some crazy people online, if you're playing blitz, they wouldn't mind doing h5. Well, you could just take it. If bishop e2, I know some people might argue, oh, they have the semi-open file for the pawn, they have compensation, but I'm just gonna go back. Look, if I activate the engine, look, 0.0. So I'm going to be fine. Bishop h6, well, this is no different than what we talked about in the 150 attack. So go to lesson number 70. Even if you don't play the Pyrrhic defense, these ideas, like I have said so many times, ideas from the Pyrrhic could be used in the King's Indian defense, from the King's Indian defense could be used in the Pyrrhic. So it's not going to hurt. You're going to learn a lot of chess by going through these lessons, even if you don't play these openings. So with that said, guys, I'm pretty sure this has been a long lesson. We're going to talk in the comments like always. Let me know what you thought of these variations, if you like the way that I showed you to deal with them, and if you have been getting them in any of your games. If you haven't, watch out, because I wouldn't be surprised if you get this in the near future. So again, I'm going to see you guys in our next lesson.